Please give a warm Louisiana welcome to Governor Jeb Bush. Governor.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Senator, Representative, thank you so much for inviting me to come speak to you all. It is a delight to be outside of the state of Florida, by the way. Thank you for letting me, for a guy who's neutral in a relatively heated political campaign, it's safer to be kind of 4 or 5 area codes away. So thanks. Your timing is impeccable. I want to start by saying, there's a book about David Petraeus that just came out that kind of got me excited, and I've changed all my remarks based on this because he's one of the great leaders, I think, in modern times, and the book is called All In, the Education of David Petraeus, by the way, in case you're interested in it. And in it, the general talks about his leadership principles, and it really makes sense if you listen to how he views taking on big challenges, the approach that he has taken, and he certainly has had some pretty big ones. I think it might fit as you all think about how you go about bringing a climate of sustainable change for Louisiana. The ultimate objective here is to have rising student achievement, isn't it? Yeah. Every child, not just the kids of affluence, they need help too. Every child needs to be successful. We need high expectations for everybody. The idea is to have a year's worth of knowledge be acquired in a year's time, starting as a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, depending on the state, and that over time, great things happen because you didn't give up on kids. The net result is that you eliminate the remediation that takes place now across the country, where almost 50% of all children that graduate from high school or go back to be able to start have to do remedial work. We create a much more prosperous place if we do that. That's a high aspirational goal, what I would call a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And so here's what Petraeus says about how you achieve these big things. First, you got to get the big ideas right. And I think that is the most important idea in our country today, is to assure we don't leave children behind, that every child gets a quality education irrespective of the zip code of where their parents live. That high expectation is important. And then the second thing he says is that you have to communicate that big idea over and over and over again. My experience as governor of the state was that people watched all this with their peripheral vision. You know, I was like in this gigantic fight. I thought it was the most important thing in the world. And it's always humbling for elected officials to realize that what they do is really not that important when you're trying to make a living, take your child to daycare and go to work, worried about the things that go on in your life. May be more interested in Kim Kardashian, perhaps. I mean, these are the things that go on in life. I have no idea why it is. Not everybody was watching every word I said about what I thought was the most important thing. So the second thing that Petraeus says is that everybody in the organization, in his case the military, or in this case the state, has to realize how important this is. Everybody has a part to play in it. And the only way that you can mobilize that kind of support is constant communication about the big idea. And the third thing is that you have to execute. Ideas are great, but they're intangible. They kind of they go into the ether unless you have the skills to and the determination and the grind it out attitude to take these ideas, in the case of education reform, pass laws, and then give it to your great new education commissioner and the Board of Education with the governor's support, and have the executive branch with superintendents and school board members and principals and teachers execute on this big idea so that it's successful. And guess what happens when you do that? When you do that, then success breeds success, and that is the beginning of the catalyst of sustainable change. So whatever it sounds, you know, at the beginning of this, when you guys did the A through F grading, it's supposed to be, that's a radical idea, to grade schools A, B, C, D, and F based on student learning. Well, it is a radical idea if you haven't done it before, but once you do it and you execute on it right, it creates a whole new other opportunity to look at other aspects of accountability so that you create a sustainable, constant change that's moving the ball up the hill, if you will, with the ultimate goal of student achievement. And then finally, You have to capture the best practices and the mistakes made along the way and reflect on them and adapt so that you can you go back to point one and start all over again. That's what we're doing here, I think, and that's what Governor Jindal's trying to do with his education initiative and why there's so many people in this room. And so when you think about what you're doing at every level of what you're doing, think about David Petraeus. He's a pretty good role model on this stuff. It's worked out pretty good in his life. Now we don't know what he's doing because he's doing it. He'd have to kill us if he told us what he's doing now. But in his public life, it was pretty good, and I think that's probably the way to go. So if you thought about that, what would be the agenda if a Martian came down with a really successful education program system and they looked at ours and they would probably say, well, this might have worked 50 years ago, probably worked really well 100 years ago, but in 2012, this system needs to change to adapt to the world that we're in today. A system that doesn't take advantage of all the things that are available to us today. So I would suggest to you that a strategy that dealt with high standards, high aspirational, lofty standards. We want the very best for our kids, so we have to reach high, and we should benchmark those standards, which should be fewer, they should be deeper, and they should be benchmarked to the world. That should be one aspirational goal, which is harder than it appears. Trust me. Over the next 5 years, you're going to see a couple of train wrecks around the country as people say, yes, we want high standards, but when they realize that a third of our children are truly college and career ready, not just in Louisiana, but across the country, there's going to be a lot of backstepping. A lot of people are going to say, oh, no, that's not fair. They're going to start saying all sorts of things. I can guarantee you what they're going to say, but the first, if we're serious about this, we need to raise the bar. We need to have much higher aspirations for our children, which means higher standards, and everybody has to adjust to those standards, and that will be a big challenge. Second is robust accountability. There ought to be a consequence, just as there is in our family life and business, certainly in politics. There ought to be a consequence that is different when children learn in great numbers and when children don't learn, when there is improvement and when there's not, when there's mediocrity or failure compared to improvement and excellence. An accountability system will allow us to do that. The first step in that, you all have begun that process by grading schools, and I can promise you that it's a simple idea, but I promise you it will make a difference. It is amazing what happened in Florida when we graded schools starting in 1999, A, B, C, D, and F, half on learning gains and half on what our expectations were based on the standards at that time. We had a majority of our schools were D and F. Not a great thing politically for the brand new governor to, it's kind of hard to brag, hey, we got, just imagine it was difficult. But over time, because there was accountability that everybody knew, there was a dramatic improvement. It was like a catalytic converter to force the entire system to go to deal with the kids in the bottom 25% of every school and to deal with the schools that were lagging behind in a chronic fashion. And so robust accountability matters. I would suggest to you that eliminating social promotion would be another element of accountability, where we have high enough expectations with our children and organize ourselves around them so that we don't create functional illiteracy for an 8th grader. How could we allow that to happen in the greatest country on the face of the earth? But sadly, today, there are children that cannot read or write, and therefore they have a hard time calculating math. They're guaranteed to drop out. They're guaranteed to create demands on the rest of us, but we tolerate this because we're worried about little Johnny's self-esteem, whether Johnny can read. And so I would suggest to you a system that is more competency-based, where children move to the next level of challenge after they've completed the first level. And until they do that, we don't stop. We make sure that we remediate, that we challenge, we try new things to make sure that children get the kind of progress they deserve. The third element of any kind of comprehensive strategy to move the needle on achievement has to be teacher effectiveness. And here again, Louisiana is proposing dramatic changes from the status quo. It will be hard. Ask Tony Bennett how hard it is to make these kinds of suggestions. People feel threatened by the kind of changes that align teachers' financial interest in their profession with student learning. It's not an easy thing to do. It requires listening a lot, and it requires the kind of skills that I wasn't as good as Tony was. Joel Kine and I weren't very good at it, but Tony is really good at it. To listen to teachers, to develop the right strategies to make sure that it is a fair system, but it is a system that is based on the fact that some teachers do extraordinary work, and they should get paid a hell of a lot more than teachers that do bad work. So this session in Louisiana, you all are going to go to make significant changes that mirror what's happened in Florida, certainly what Indiana is a model. And I think the objective here, which I think is fantastic in our federalist system, is to jump over, catapult over the old states that have already begun this process and become the leader in the nation. And you're poised to do this with your legislation, and I wish you great luck on that. And the fourth challenge, or the fourth element of a strategy for rising student achievement, is to empower parents to make choices for their children that constantly put tension in the system so that there's a greater chance of learning. I believe that we need to get to a system where the state provides support and parents are so engaged in their children's education that they make choices, and the choices should be abundant. They should be charter schools, there should be private schools, there should be digital school, virtual schools, there should be hybrid schools, there should be excellent public schools. Ultimately, we need to get to a point where you don't define the schools based on their structure, you define the schools based on how children are learning in them. And if you can move to that point where you're empowering parents and you're also asking them to be accountable by helping make these decisions, then you're going to put pressure on the system to bring about accelerated rising student achievement. This is controversial as well, trust me. And Ben is here, who's from Los Angeles. He'll tell you the stories of the great challenge of the parent trigger, which is also on your docket for this session, as it is in Florida and probably 20 other states. It's a really interesting idea. This is an idea that if parents are not satisfied, if a majority of parents aren't satisfied of their child's education under certain circumstances, they can be the catalyst themselves to change the structure of learning so that there's a more focus on the success of the school. But whether it's that or a voucher program or expanding charter schools, there's constant pushback on this. And so the execution of these ideas is important, but the simple fact is, based on the experience that we've had, Joel Klein has had in New York City, what's now being experienced here in Louisiana and other places, is when you empower parents to make choices, you improve all schools. The lesson of Florida is, which has the most abundant voucher programs and school choice programs in the country, is that all schools get better when parents are involved and there is an empowerment there and there's a consequence. So if schools are chronically failing, parents can choose other options. Guess what happens? The schools that their children go to improve, certainly, and they receive the benefit of that, but the schools that they leave behind get better, which is contradictory to all of the arguments of the establishment in education, but the data is there for people to see in Florida. All schools get better with school choice. And the final thing I would suggest is that we're living in 2012, and whoever invented the internet, that's in dispute these days, but whoever invented the internet, it's been around a while now. It's quite effective to bring high quality content into the classroom. Why don't we embrace the technological revolution to assure that our children learn? Our children learn, they already understand how to use these tools. Why don't we create partnerships in our classrooms to bring high quality content in that is world class, where you can have adaptive software to make sure that children are learning at their own pace, in their own way, in a way that stimulates them to learn more, and as they learn, they can move to the next challenge rather than be held back. The idea that we have in a classroom in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 25 kids say, and they all learn the same way, and they all learn in the same pace, and so therefore the teacher has to teach the same thing to them, may have been the case. I don't think it was. Possibly it was the case 100 years ago. But we live in a diverse place. We now have tools that can allow us to customize the learning experience. And it seems to me that both through legislation and through actions in the classroom, we ought to make it easier for digital learning to get into the classroom, so that if a child that's living in an inner city in a difficult circumstance in New Orleans, but has incredible language skills, wants to take a Mandarin course, that they ought to be able to have the ability to do it. If they want to take higher quality math, but the math teacher was never really taught math, he or she is teaching out of field, doesn't it make sense to bring this technology in to allow the teacher who is really good at managing the classroom but not so good at teaching math to do this in partnership? There's a whole myriad of ways that we can improve the learning experience, and my hope is that through this effort, through the legislation that you all are working on, that you hit it on all cylinders. The net result of this, I guarantee it, I guarantee you the net result of the efforts already in place in Louisiana and what is on the dockets for passing of laws and then the proper execution of those laws is that you're going to begin to see rising student achievement, first probably in spurts that will get everybody excited, and then over a sustained period of time you'll begin to see that the remediation rates into your community college systems and universities will begin to drop, just as they have in Florida, that your graduation rates begin to rise. We were 50th in the country in graduation rates 12 years ago. Now we're at the national average. You'll begin to see, particularly in the early grades, children reading at grade level based on national studies. Florida was 29th out of 31 in the 4th grade NAEP in 1998, and last year we were above the national average in the 4th grade NAEP. The Hispanic students in 4th grade do better than or equal to 24 states in 4th grade reading. Florida low-income Hispanic students do better than the California average and the Louisiana average. This happened because we created a comprehensive strategy. We created the aspirational goal. We created a comprehensive strategy. We stayed on it, like they say in Louisiana, like white on rice. We never let in. We constantly adjusted. We added new things to create a sustainable climate of reform. We celebrated the success of great teachers, assuring that children learned, and we created a climate where people were no longer opposed to everything that was going on. They began to see that if you work hard in a comprehensive way, you can begin to move the needle, and that would be the last thing I would say. This is something that you all are passionate about. The fact that you would come on a Monday morning to discuss this is pretty darn impressive. But this is a decade-long struggle. If you want to be above the national average and have graduation rates that is a source of pride, that brings about industry that creates high-wage jobs, this is a struggle for at least a decade. It took more than a generation of time to get where we were as a nation, which is not good as it relates to educating the next generation. It will take at least a decade to get to the kind of results that you need. So dogged determination is the last attribute that General Petraeus would probably suggest is something of great value. And I know that if you do this, and if you do it as a team, and you take away the partisanship, which is hard to do in politics, and make this a lofty aspirational goal for the entire state of Louisiana, I guarantee you, not just 10 years from now, but far sooner than that, we'll come back and we'll celebrate your enormous success. So work hard, have fun, put joy in your hearts doing this, because there's nothing more important for our country or for your state or for your communities. God bless you all. Appreciate you.